What up, dude bros? I'm Frank. This is a video review of the Cynthia by Silly Butts. This blaster is a 3D printed, high-performance, bolt-action, magazine-fed blaster that shoots exclusively half-length darts. External overview starting out with the front. Here I have attached the Scar barrel. This is a barrel add-on that adds rifling to the dart to add a little bit of spiral or spin, and it increases the accuracy quite a bit. But this is a removable barrel attachment, and what's that? A freaking in-strike barrel lug? Yeah, it is. Out of Darts sent me an in-strike barrel lug for this blaster. This is ridiculous. So if you want to put on your barrel attachments, you totally can. It's not very stable. It's not recommended. I won't be doing it, but wow. Has this joke gone too far? No, never. It cannot. In all seriousness, Out of Darts said this actually does not come with the blaster if you buy it from his website. It might be offered as an additional add-on if you want one. It doesn't make any sense, but it made me laugh out loud when I unboxed this thing and found it. Freaking tactics, bro. But the Scar barrel attachment system is a little bit unusual. There's a little O-ring that slides onto the barrel here, and then this back piece like catches the barrel. So you put it together, and then it screws on like this, then you push it back to make sure it's seated and sealed, and bam, now you have a rifling barrel attachment, which adds spin and stability to your darts. It shrank my groups a ton. It looks ridiculous on the front of the blaster, but it's totally worth using. But that is the tip. Moving back, we have a Picatinny-style tactical rail all along the top here, and another one on the bottom right here. My unit came with this little attachment right here, which slides onto the rail like I showed, and then you can put this little guy through here to lock it in place. And wha-bam, you have an angled foregrip up here. But if you don't like this one, you can put on a different vertical grip onto the pick style rail, or given the bolt action nature, you can put on a Picatinny mounted bipod if you want to. I think it looks way cooler like this, so I've been leaving it off. Moving back right here, we have a slot in the right and the left hand side so you can see your magazine. This lets you see exactly how many darts you have loaded, which is really convenient. And the air tube right here is thin enough so you can insert and remove your magazine without pulling back the bolt. Moving down to the mag well, the magazine releases this whole entire orange piece right here. It's a little too far away for me to activate with my firing hand like this, but you can use your offhand's thumb to pull it out like that. It's a really smooth magwell, and there is a built-in flare in the bottom here. I love flared magwells. It makes reloading just a little bit smoother. And this one has straight lines on the outside, so you can't even tell it's flared. So it looks cool, and it works really well. And this blaster is Talon mag compatible. This is the 18-round Talon mag, but it'll work with anything that's shaped like a Talon mag. Moving back to the priming system, this is a bolt-action blaster to prime. You do that. The prime strength required is way harder than a Nerf Elite blaster because this one's shooting over 200 FPS. And there is a little locking notch in the front here, so once you click your bolt in, it's not going to open itself up. However, you can ignore that completely and prime and shoot the blaster without ever actually lowering the bolt handle. So if you don't want to lower it and you're just trying to fire as quickly as possible, you can leave it up for a little bit faster rate of fire. But interestingly, the bolt handle can move all the way around to the other side like this, which is very, very unusual. But if you're left-handed, you could technically shoot this blaster as a right-handed model. You don't get to lower the bolt handle into the locked position like on the right, but if you want to hand this to a lefty, he can technically operate it just fine. It's not ideal, but it works. That's a good thing for the lefties, but it's also really weird as a right-handed shooter. I own a bolt gun and I shoot at long range pretty often, so I'm pretty familiar with the action, so it's very unusual to not have a stopper at the top there. That's not a big deal, but it is worth mentioning. So the prime itself is fairly smooth, but it is a very strong spring, so it takes a little bit of oomph. But it's kind of a weird prime because your bolt handle is unsupported, and so is this whole rod here. So there's quite a bit of movement here, and it doesn't really inspire confidence. It doesn't feel like really robust. It didn't break through my testing procedure or anything, but it is a little bit wobbly. Down to the trigger pull is pretty normal. This blaster does not have slam fire, but it also does not have a trigger lock, so if you want to deprime the blaster, you totally can. Just don't pull the trigger when your bolt is back because that will snap forward and you might break something or hurt your finger. Now down to the grip. Overall, this is a surprisingly comfortable grip considering how small the thumbhole area is. Thumbhole stocks inherently restrict your wrist, but on a bolt-action rifle, it's actually really quite comfortable to have one like this because you're not like tactically moving it like you would a carbine. It does feel a little bit thinner than some other grips, but this whole blaster is like really, really thin. I have a huge hand with long fingers, but I still think this grip is pretty comfortable. Moving back in the rear, we have a sling mount right here and over here. And to the stock, this is a permanent, fixed-in-place, non-adjustable, non-removable stock. And it is worth noting the butt plate back here is very, very narrow. It's kind of a strange shape, and because it's such a strong blaster that you're supposed to prime off the shoulder, being so small concentrates all that force into a smaller area. So after shooting this a few hundred times, my shoulder was a little bit tender. I wouldn't mind having a slightly larger stock. I think it would be a little bit more comfortable on the shoulder. And the stock does feel a little bit short. I would like to have a little extension because it just feels a little bit cramped up here. I'm also taller than average though, so if you're more normal-sized human, you should be pretty comfortable on it. But your length of pull here, the distance of your stock is pretty important, especially with a bolt-action blaster, especially shooting a spring this strong. So feeling a little cramped here did bite a little bit into my play experience. That's an external overview of the Cynthia. Now I'll show you the blaster firing. Shooting red Worker Gen 3 half-length darts out of a Worker Talon mag. Operating the Cynthia was pretty fun. Bolt action is pretty smooth, especially considering it's 3D printed. You can hear the 3D printing whine, but you can't feel it. It's not a rough prime at all. It's a pretty heavy prime, but given its muzzle velocity, that's to be expected. But no jams or malfunction, operation was as expected. So what's the deal with the scar barrel? I wanted to measure the groups with the scar barrel and without to see is it worth using, because it looks absolutely ridiculous on the muzzle there, so I'm only going to use it if it's really worth using. So I set up a test to try to shoot really consistent groups. I got my rifle tripod and clamped the Cynthia into it. This stabilizes the blaster to take out some of the human sway when shooting groups. Then I put on a red dot sight so I had the exact same point of aim every trigger pull. And I didn't put up a laser pointer to show where I was aiming, so you just have to trust that my trigger pulls were pretty clean. But I have this little peephole on my front door which lets light in, so I put the red dot over top of that small light every single trigger pull. Then I shot some groups, some with the scar barrel and some without. Here's that test. As you can see, adding the scar rifling really changes the group. It really tightens it up. I'm surprised at that change in groups, especially at 35 feet. The darts seem more consistent, the darts seem more stable. Overall, it's far more accurate. So even as silly as it looks, it totally makes sense to use, especially on a bolt-action blaster if you're trying to be a sniper. Snipers want to shoot tight groups. This thing helps you shoot tight groups. Get this thing. Be a sniper. Logic, bro. Logic. So to compare the muzzle velocity of this blaster to others, I put it up on my chronograph. With the scar barrel attached, I achieved an average velocity of 213 feet per second shooting worker Gen 3 half-length darts. Without the scar barrel attached, I got an average of 220 FPS. So you do see a small drop in muzzle velocity and your point of impact does drop just a little bit, but it's totally worth it in my opinion. Those tighter groups just speak for themselves. But this blaster is shooting really, really hard. Not sure if it's intentional, but it's almost set up to play in a 150 FPS game as the bolt-action sniper. Especially if you gave this blaster a magazine limit restriction, then you could actually compete with pump-action, higher capacity blasters shooting 150 FPS, which could be kind of fun to let some people have lower capacity, lower rate of fire shooting just slightly further than other people. So that's the objective information I can provide on this blaster. Now to my personal opinion. Overall, I'm very satisfied with the Cynthia. This blaster's fun to use. It's obviously a plinker. I would never field a bolt-action blaster in an actual battle. I just prefer pump action. It's much, much faster. But just like the Slab by the same designer, Silly Butts, it's just a fun blaster to use. I don't think they were necessarily trying to design the most battle-effective blaster, just one that's fun to plink with. And they really hit the mark. This one is very fun to plink with. Overall, a very good experience and a high opinion of the blaster, but I do have to complain about a few things. You know me, if I'm not complaining about something, I'm not doing my job well enough as a product reviewer. It's my job to complain. First, the proportions and usage of the bolt and some of the things in here are just a little bit strange. The bolt comes really far down and actually interferes with my index finger. It's my muscle memory to keep my index finger straight outside of the trigger guard until I've made the conscious decision to fire. It's rule 3. But the bolt goes so low and it lands right where my finger wants to be, so it's just kind of awkward. It's not that big a deal, but you buy a blaster like this to emotionally plink and to have a good smooth time. So I'm tempted to glue a little piece of plastic right here to make the bolt stick out a little bit more outward instead of all the way down, because it's just interfering with my finger and it bugs me. Next, when you pull up on the bolt, you can spin the bolt handle all the way over, which I guess is a good thing. If you occasionally need to hand this to a left-handed shooter, they can technically shoot it now, and you don't have to lock it down in the rear position to fire. So if you want to leave it over here and just use it like a retaliator, you kind of could. But that changed my emotional experience when racking the bolt, because typically there's a block right here which prevents you from over-rotating your bolt, and the bolt is typically locked in a channel as you pull it back. This one's not, so as you're pulling it back, you can move the bolt up and down. So it changes the mechanics a little bit, and it's not quite as strong and robust as it could be, I think. And on that note, when the bolt is in the rear position, there's a great deal of shake in this system here. It looks unique and interesting to have this thing exposed. You can touch it, there's nothing blocking you. But I wouldn't mind having a little outer tube right here to add a little bit of rigidity to the system, because having the bolt be able to move all the way around as you're priming, it's just a little weird. After you shoot it a few dozen times, you'll get used to it, and it does work fine, so I am being pretty nitpicky here. Next complaint, the stock. The stock is super narrow. If this blaster was only shooting 100 FPS, it wouldn't be a big deal. It would be good enough. But the ergonomics and the comfort of the stock become that much more important when you put in a really strong spring like this. And you're supposed to rack it off the shoulder like this, and this spring is over 200 FPS spring, so that's a lot of pressure going into a small area right here. I have red marks on my shoulder, and my shoulder is noticeably tender after shooting this a few hundred times. Feels like I just got back from a range day shooting my 308, but not in like a good way. So the bolt and the stock complaints I think everybody will relate to when you use this blaster. One more minor tiny complaint that most people probably won't care about. This blaster blaster is super thin. The ergonomics of holding the front part of the blaster is very unusual. The blaster is super tall, so it's hard to get a good grip on the front here. Something that's a little bit shorter and a little bit fatter fits the hand just a little bit better. And this angled grip is super comfortable to actually take the shot on, but when you're trying to prime it, I found my left hand kind of struggling for a good handhold. I ended up mostly putting my left hand up here. It looks super awkward, but it's the most stable way to grip the front of the blaster. But that's not objectively bad or anything, and I do think the blaster looks really cool because of the front end. But because it's so tall and so thin, it's just a weirder blaster to hold. And again, as a non-performance blaster, it's all about the emotional experience, and I think I have better emotions when my hands are just comfortable. It just feels a little bit quirky. So the performance is obviously awesome, no complaints there. All my complaints are just in usage and ergonomics and stuff. And again, a lot of that is subjective. You might very much like this blaster. But overall positive opinion of the Cynthia for sure. So now to the question to buy or not to buy. If you're in the market for a high-performance bolt-action magazine-fed blaster, yeah, definitely consider the Cynthia. However, this time my positive purchase recommendation is mostly for the people with 3D printers who want to print their own blaster or buy the kit from Out of Darts and assemble it on your own. If you enjoy tinkering and assembling things, nothing beats buying a 3D printed kit and assembling it on your own. When you build it yourself, you have such a better understanding of how it works, how it runs, and how to maintain it. But if you don't care at all about any of that and you just want to shoot darts with a blaster, I'd really recommend the Shellington Kieran over this blaster. The Shellington Kieran is injection molded, which just feels better in the hands, and the Kieran's bolt system is more fun to rack. Now, the Cynthia's bolt is not rough or unsmooth or anything, but this unstable flailing bolt handle really just bites into the play experience in my opinion. The Shellington Kieran has a trapped bolt, so racking that bolt system is just way more fun. And Shellington just came out with a mag conversion kit, so you don't have to use the shells if you don't want to. So at that point, you're paying a lot of money, you're not getting the ability to use shell ejection, you're using 3D printed parts. So this versus the Kieran, I would personally go and buy the Kieran for sure. But to the mechanical group that wants to assemble their own blaster, or if you really like the cosmetics of this compared to the Shellington Kieran, I still have a positive opinion of the Cynthia, and it's definitely worth buying. So that's kind of a muddy personal opinion there, but hopefully I've laid out everything you need to make an educated purchase decision on your own. If you'd like to buy the Cynthia, check out outofdarts.com. Out of Darts has the hardware kit, so if you have a 3D printer, you can save some money, or you can buy the whole kit and assemble it yourself, and eventually in a few weeks, they're going to have an assembled version on their website as well. And of course, because it's 3D printed, you can have it printed in whatever colors you want, which is super cool. I'll put links to what I just mentioned in the description box below for you to check it out. And thank you very much to Out of Darts for supplying this sample unit for review. That's it for this video review of the Silly Butts. Silly Butts. That's it for this video review of... It's so silly. Like, what a silly name. Silly Butts. I've got the giggles. Okay. So that's it for this video review of the Silly Butts Cynthia. If you'd like to buy one, check the link in the description box below. Thanks so much for watching, bros, and as always, stay tactical.